Hello and welcome to this edition of the Clarendon Chronicles podcast. My guest today is Dr. Darren Stevens, who is a developmental psychologist and next level coach. Darren, amongst many roles, is the founder of the Institute for Adult Development, lecturer at Northampton University in the UK, and the creator of constructed development theory in coaching. His academic qualifications include a BA degree in business management, a BSc degree in psychology, an MSc in behavioural sciences, and a PhD in cognitive behavioural psychology. Dr. Stevens has coached leaders and teams in multinational companies, and his powerful approach strengthens leaders and organizational capabilities through transformational cognitive development and higher level systemic thinking. Darren presents new ways for executives, managers, and consultants to reflect on who they are as leaders, how they relate to and impact others, and how to challenge their organizations to reach new levels of excellence. Darren, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm really excited actually to learn about your particular approach to coaching and understand more about the work that you are doing.
You're very kind. What a great intro.
Thank you very much, Darren. Can I start, if I may, by making an observation? Having studied a number of your articles and commentaries, you discuss how coaching has evolved from what you describe as first generation to second generation to third generation coaching, and now on to what you describe as next level coaching. How have you actually seen coaching evolve yourself? And to what extent do you think coaching to date has actually had some limitations, Darren?
A couple of good questions in there. I mean, I'm 50 years of age, and what you tend to find with people my age is at some point in their past, they did some NLP training, neuro-linguistic programming. They probably did a practitioner and a master practitioner. And within that, they'd have learned how to do some coaching. Now, a lot of that is about positive psychology, you know, and we then learn how to do towards or away from thinking, but predominantly towards. So you can tell anybody that's done NLP, they're always going for the goal, right? So when you then look at the way coaching has evolved over time, generation 1, 2, 3, they're not my ideas, by the way. These are the things that are out there. You've got your SMART goals and things like this. Now, the problem is that SMART and NLP and all this come into the first generation, but then it's not until the third that you start getting a bit more discursive, discussive, interactive coaching approaches where they start to think about the relationship. Now, for me, the idea of the relationship between the client and the coach is what Robert Keegan and Otto Lasky and all these other developmental psychologists call a stage 3 approach, which is socialized mind. So what I noticed was that what if you're not thinking in a socialized way? What if you're not procedural and you don't like SMART goals? Because I'm not. What tends to happen is, or what we found was that they bail on the process. By the time they get to measurable, which again is another procedural way of looking at things, they've already had enough and they're like, yeah, I'm out. I'm not doing it anymore. What I noticed was that I developed for the, it says there, the constructive development theory, how we construct our thinking using these 50 cognitive shortcuts that have been around for a very long time, 40, 50 years, like towards, away from, internal, external. What I noticed was that from a coaching perspective, somebody who comes to a coach in the first instance has a relatively external locus of evaluation. The traditional coaching approaches don't necessarily take this into account. So you asked about the next level coaching. I'm going to come on to that because I use this system called the identity compass, and it deconstructs our thinking in a profile into 50 of these cognitive shortcuts. Well, they are completely different in how they construct their thinking, depending on whether you are what Keegan would call level 2, level 3, or level 4, right? No one's level 5. I've never met a level 5 person. So what I noticed was when I was doing some research in a university is that somebody who is very socialized in their thinking has specific cognitive intentions. They're the ones who are going to require relatively coach-based approaches. But somebody who is very internal and doesn't really think about joining the dots in the way that higher level thinkers do, they're going to be requiring something a bit more therapy-based, shall we say. And then at level 4, at the higher end, it's a completely different conversation altogether. They don't need coaching. They don't need therapy. What they need is a developmental dialogue. So I wanted to know what is the difference that makes a difference in the coaching approaches. And then when I determined that how aware we are of our construction of self using these cognitive shortcuts, can I choose between internal and external, or external and internal? Can I choose? I'm using my hands like everybody can see me, so I apologize. What I want to know is, are they at choice? Can they choose not to, right? Coaching doesn't really tease this out. What they do is they look for a process, whether it's SMART or POWER or all these other names, all these other acronyms and all these other procedurally based ways of thinking. Then when you combine the idea of a process with a relationship, which is what they teach in other systems like your BPSs and your IFCs, you know, they put a lot of emphasis on the relationship between the coach and the client. It's actually not necessary to have an emotional attachment or a relationship in the way that it's taught. What we do in next level coaching is the point. And what it is let's say somebody comes to you and they're really, really external in their locus of evaluation. And if you said to them, Jeremy, I really don't like your glasses, they look terrible. And you say, oh my gosh, Darren doesn't like my glasses. External. But then you say to me, Darren, actually, I don't care what you think. Internal, right? What we need to know is that the coach in the room doesn't take into account the fact that that person is really, really external. So everything they say is going to be done by the person. But somebody who's very, very internal might not even think about doing anything that the coach tells them. In fact, a really internal person will gauge the coach on their level of expertise and say, why should I listen to Darren? What's his level of expertise? So taking into account the fact that there are 50 of these, not just internal, external, towards away from people, places, you know, affiliation, influence, which an achievement, which is based on David McClelland's work. Somebody who is really, really intent on power in their environment will require a different way of being coached, right? Do you want to jump in? Are you okay?
Let me stop you there, because it kind of leads on to my next thought process for a question as well, because a huge amount to unpack there, which is just scratched the surface. But I was drifting onto, and you described so many different kinds of coach that might be necessary. So how do you view the coaching industry, or whether it's an industry or a vocation? How do you view the coaching industry today? And are you able to categorize some of those different kinds of coach that you described? And actually, you hinted at was what one was in my background thought process as well, which was there's obviously different kinds of clients as well.
Definitely. So for me, it's simple. When I say simple, it's level based. In other words, a coach, my system, the constructive development theory, in order to measure someone's cognitive complexity based on their level of self-awareness, I have something called the awareness quotient. It goes from 5 to 10. Simple as that. 5, 6, 7, 9, 10. A coach at AQ5, at level 5, cannot coach a client at level 6. In other words, if the client is a level above the coach, they can't coach them. Not that they won't coach them, they can't coach them because they can't see the patterns, the thinking style, and the deconstruction of their thinking. They can't see it. Now, this is controversial, I accept that, but it's borne out. It's not just me who says this, Otto Lasky says it too. And in essence, I can demonstrate to you, I mean, over the years, I've been on lots and lots of workshops and things about coaching. And one time this lady said to me, you know, we come here as coaches and we come here as equals. No problem with that. We come here as intellectual equals. Let me stop you there. And the reason I said that is because at the different levels of cognitive complexity, the way coaching is taught is that if you have a process like the BPS, if you have a process, you can coach anyone. It's just not true. Okay, you can't coach If someone who I know in front of me is at AQ5, I know for a fact they can't coach me at AQ8. Now, it is that simple. You need to be a level above your client in order to see their patterns, because your superpower as a higher level coach is the fact that they are so external in their locus of evaluation that they can't see the internal perspective, but you can, because your thinking is balanced across internal and external, and you offer them just a little bit of internal that they cannot do. Not that they won't do or shouldn't, they can't do it. And that is next level coaching. You pick the top 3 cognitive intentions where the disparity is the greatest, and invariably they're going to be the things that make the biggest difference. Now, let me go back a step quickly, because we don't care what the client's problem is. What we're interested in is how they construct their thinking, because if they construct their thinking at level 5, AQ5, they also construct their problem at AQ5. So when we say to them and grow their thinking to 6, or even maybe a little bit more, they look down on their AQ5 problem, and sometimes it just disappears. It's no longer a problem. We haven't even touched the problem. We've grown their level of thinking capacity, which means, as you're probably making in your own brain now, you're making the connection. They've already thought around the problem.
And is this the fundamental basis, Darren, of what you have, because this is your theory, isn't it? Constructed development theory is your intellectual property.
Yes,
it's
sir.
What you've developed. And how did you get to the stage of thinking, this is what I want to do, this is what I've discovered, this is how I'm going to put it into practice? And have you managed to convert organizations, leaders into this way of thinking, Darren?
Ooh, what a great question. Yes, but actually it's really difficult, because you're selling an idea. So what I've got is, if I came up to you and I said, Jeremy, my name is Dr. Darren Stevens, and I created a new theory called constructive development theory, and I would like to use it with you and your business to develop your team. You'd look at me and go, maybe, probably not. But if someone else came up to you and said, hello, my name is Brian from the Institute for Adult Development, and we use a system created by a bloke called Stevens. It's a really cool system because it allows you to grow, blah, blah. Can we come and use it in your business? They're more likely to say yes. It's the vicarious, what would they call it? Proof, I suppose, is the answer. So what I've done is I've created the reason the Institute for Adult Development came about is because when you try to apply this from a coaching perspective, things like the ICF, the EMCC cannot validate my approach. They don't use levels, right? So I created the Institute to self-validate. Why? Because when you start with a fundamental difference in how we coach entirely, we look at the top 3 cognitive intentions, the ones that are out of kilter, and we go from there. Well, the entire relationship changes, the entire coaching approach changes, and that can't be validated, for example, by the ICF. So then what you do is you've got a number of people coming onto my workshops from many, many different countries, who then go away to their own country, certified and qualified to use CDT, my theory, as a coaching methodology and as a development methodology. And all of a sudden, you've got a global institute. So my research is in French, German, Spanish, Finnish, that kind of thing. It's in quite a few languages. And you've also got, my domain is in all the other languages too. And it's going to be in Farsi soon. It's going to be in Finnish soon. That kind of, I say Farsi, I think that's right. So what I did was I convinced existing coaches and developers, people who like to trainers, I suppose, to use the principles of CDT to grow the thinking of their clients in a different way, and they become advocates for the system.
And is this how the Institute for Adult Development came about as well? So am I right therefore in thinking this is aligned with constructive development theory? This is how you're spreading your intellectual property and your techniques and your development on a global basis, Darren?
Yes, sir, that's exactly right. I've got people, there's a company in Australia, a very successful coaching company called the Coaching Room. Let's say they've got a number of modules that they do over time and charge for, obviously. And a lot of their work comes from my research, because they're used to using cognitive intentions. They're used to using the identity compass. And then when they looked at it from a developmental perspective, you can map, for example, you can map cognitive intentions towards away from internal, external. You can map Enneagram, DISC, spiral dynamics. You can map them all to cognitive intentions. And the 4 principles of the theory are intention, awareness, choice, and response. And when you add those to existing systems, it changes how you understand the system. What's your intention? How aware are you of that intention? Can you choose a different response in a moment based on this new intention, based on your awareness? So that, for me, is a fundamental building block of every developmental approach. Doesn't matter which language. And the reason I say that is because I've got data on people who are bicultural, shall we say. So somebody, let's say, who thinks they are German and Spanish, right? In both languages, in both cultures, are active. When they do a profile in German, certain German stereotypes come out. And when they do a profile in Spanish, certain Spanish stereotypes come out. But what's really, really interesting is something called, and forgive me for being a lecturer here, but the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, where your language construction and your language creates your culture. So we know that in Spanish, this person has a completely different construction of self to their construction of self in German. Same bloke, 2 different ways of being in the world based on culture, right? And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to try and push it out to everywhere, because it is an awesome, I can't say it's an awesome theory because it's my theory, but you know what I mean.
Yeah. So that cuts through it. And you mentioned something there which I'd like to go back on, actually. So that creation of yours, which is intention, awareness, choice, and response. So
Yes.
I mean, you've also referenced in some of your work, Darren, that a lot of organizations might follow historically the Institute of Leadership and Management Level 7 coaching framework. And in fact, I did that as a first qualification in coaching. And then you've moved on to next level coaching, and you referenced specifically there intention, awareness, choice, and response. Can I just delve a bit more into that in terms of how that works with coachees? What are the benefits of doing that in your particular model there?
The harsh reality of the research is that we're not self-aware. We think we're self-aware. So when you ask your average person, are you aware? They say yes, but they actually don't know what they don't know about their own thinking. They don't know how their thinking deconstructs. They don't know that in some contexts, they're automatic in their responses. Why are people coaches? Because they want to help people. Well, can they choose not to help them? Can you see a little old lady fall over and not help her up? I mean, you're never going to do that, are you? But you know what I mean? Can you choose to walk past her? And most people cannot. So the question from an intention, awareness, choice, response perspective is, can you choose not to, right? If you then think about that from a psychometric perspective or an MBTI perspective, where you've got types, and someone is INTJ, right? Can they choose not to do those things? If you then look at it from a levels-based perspective, the MBTI has 16 boxes, 16 types. But I would suggest that if you then had the 16 types at my level 5, 6, 7, 8, I can make the MBTI about 600% more robust by having those types at each level of my system. And for example, some of them, like INTJ, might not be available at the lower levels of my framework. Now, what's their intention? What's their awareness? Of course, if they're not aware, they can't be INTJ, because the MBTI system says that they are the reflectors and blah, blah, blah. I'm almost making it up here because I forget. But the point being is that using IACR, we can determine whether someone really, truly is capable of choosing their behavior in the moment. What comes before behavior is their thinking. And we forget that. Otto Lasky said to me that he doesn't like my system because it's about behavior. It's not about behavior. It's about how you know what you know about your thinking, which is our epistemic stance. How do you know what you know about your thinking? And can you choose a different thinking in the moment? Right? So for me, intention, well, I'm goal oriented, or I'm people oriented, or I'm detail oriented. Well, what's my awareness of that intention? Well, actually, I'm not very aware, because I'm always going to help someone. Well, if I were aware of helping people all the time, and that's my automatic response, can I choose not to? Well, yes. Well, now you're back on choice and response. So for me, and don't get me wrong, lots of people have read my work and said, Darren, we think it's CAIR, you know what I mean, or whatever. But it breaks down into the sense of, what's your intention? How aware are you of that intention? What choices does that awareness create? And can you choose a different response in a moment? So it doesn't matter whether we're bouncing around between other systems, psychometrics or coaching or whatever. Those 4 fundamental pillars help us to understand how aware we are of our construction of self in any context.
How do clients respond to this? So you're dealing with people at lots of different levels, and you and I as coaches in different ways will have come across people who, to a certain extent, might be generally positive about coaching. They might be slightly hostile. When you come along and say, I've got ICR and I've got constructed development theory, what reactions do you get when you say, actually, I can really help you? So you're dealing with perhaps leaders or teams of C-suite officers, and you've got the team, you've got the systemic thinking. What reactions do you get from that?
I need to be careful how I say this, because I don't actually care. I don't care where they are. I don't care what they do. I don't care what their role is or their rank or their title, because even people who are very, very high up in organizations think in relatively similar ways to you and me. And I can determine how self-aware they are, how complex they are within 30 seconds, right? So what I do is I ask questions and I disrupt their thinking.
So give us a sneak preview. I can't resist asking the question now.
Yeah, I disrupt them immediately.
Yeah.
Right. So I would say to them, I would ask them, look, you're at the rank where information comes in. Okay. So you're at a level of an organization where I might be here and you're here in this organization. You're privy to information I'm not privy to. Right. But do you think you're making better decisions simply because you're a higher rank? Your cognitive complexity isn't as high as mine or yours, Jeremy, potentially, but by virtue of their rank, they think they're smarter. And this is true. I've called it the authority superiority syndrome, right? Because, and it abbreviates to ASS, right? And the reason, and it's an interesting one, because as soon as I come along and I say to them, your thinking is sameness and procedural, you don't even know what to do to change things. And you think a radical change is changing the title. You haven't got a clue how to make changes. But you're talking about change, or we need radical change. What does that mean to you? Nothing at all, right? You're sameness and procedural, which means you will never change. And then when you hit them with how they think and you map it out for them and demonstrate to them that, yeah, you're saying the right words, but you don't actually believe it. You're not really doing it. That disruption is enough to say, they say, Darren, right, let's do a profile and let's figure out how I think. Yeah. So for me, even when I meet CEOs or whatever, I'm not that interested in their rank. I'm more interested in how I disrupt their thinking to the point where they recognize the validity of constructed development theory. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And I mean, clearly this would probably need to be anonymous in the way that you respond, but have you got any examples that you can share with the audience about, I work with these individuals, this team, this group, and I started and they behaved in a particular way, and because of the work that you've done with them, particularly on constructed development theory, this is how they influenced the way that they were thinking and did things differently, Darren?
There's a number of things. What tends to happen when you go to organizations is you get the person who's hired you could be the HR person, but what they want to do is work with the team, and the team's got a manager. And in one particular case, the manager, when I profiled them, let's say was about here. Let's say they were AQ 5, maybe 6, right? AQ 5 and a bit. But they had 2 people in this quite big team who were really good thinkers, like almost up towards AQ 8. The problem was the manager didn't understand the word they said, didn't get the patterns, didn't get what they were trying to get at when they were talking. So there was a disconnect between the people who were working for the manager and what the manager wanted. So when the manager later advertised for an assistant manager position, one of these people who was a high-level thinker applied for the job. Did they get the job? Did they get it?
I suspect they didn't.
They did not, because they, I don't mean it like this, but they ran circles around the manager's thinking. So now think about this. Who did the manager employ? What level thinker was the person that the manager actually employed? Same level as the manager themselves. So they're hiring like for like. Somebody who is interested in developing their role, being challenged, would have hired the higher level person because they'd have recognized that, you know what, I don't actually get a single word this person says. That means that they're ABC. Yeah. So for me, the positivity and the negativity is this. The person who was really high level, they were more complex than their role. So they got bored and left. That's called bore out. The guy called Cek Malay, I've probably said it incorrectly, Cek Malay. They got bored and left. The person in the managerial role was not complex enough for his role because the role demanded a greater complexity. So he burned out and left, right? So you had 2 people leaving. One because they were bored and more complex in the role, and one because they weren't as complex as the role demanded. And don't get me wrong, they didn't leave the business, they just moved. Yeah, they moved around.
I think this is really interesting because before becoming a coach, as the audience, most of the audience may know, I spent 20 odd years in boardroom, main board, C-suite roles, and I'm inwardly smiling because I recognize quite a lot of the characters that you describe, and I think some of the listeners will recognize those characters and be able to identify with those characters. And as an executive, I would have probably put myself in the category of I get bored quite easily. I like to be challenged a lot, and sometimes that brings its own challenges because you may be not ready for that challenge, but you maybe think you are, and therefore you end up with a few scars on your back from the work that you're doing. In that kind of environment, and listeners will see that and recognize that in their organizations.
Yes.
Can it work having all of those different people together? Because in speaking to lots of different academic coaches, you and others all talk about the systemic thinking, the team thinking, and coaching just an individual is a real challenge because there's all sorts of those things going on around you. Can it work having different people in the same room with the different levels in your theory?
Yeah, I mean, what I would do, let's say there's 10 of them, I would profile each one and demonstrate across the 50 cognitive intentions where their thinking marries and where it conflicts. Now, don't forget that a conflict isn't a conflict. It could just be something where somebody is massively towards and somebody is massively away from. The massively away from person is risk averse. Well, that might just put dampeners on the people who are a bit gung-ho. So it's useful in context. Yeah. You have something called upwardly and downwardly divided teams. This is Otto Lasky's research, but I can map this out. And what you've got is if you've got a team of 10, a C-suite of 10, and 2 of them are really high level thinkers and the other 8 are not, what tends to happen is they say, oh, you 2 are always trying to take over this team. I can't believe, why do we have to do everything you say? That's one, right? Reverse it. 8 of them are really high level thinkers, 2 of them are not, and they're there for whatever reason. They either slow the process down, they either limit the capacity of the team overall, but these are the things that the businesses are not willing to take on board because it's not nice to say, actually, you need to get rid of those 2.
Yep.
Yeah. So you've also got, and I teach leadership at university. So what I've done as part of my modules, I now say, because I really hate things like servant leader. It's just nonsense, right? If you have somebody who's a low level thinker on my system, AQ 5 and 6, they are not capable of doing transformational leadership, right? There's a number of leaderships, right? I'll just give you this one. AQ 8 and 9, definitely capable, can choose to do it. But the problem isn't that. The problem is that all the ones at the lower levels are not capable of doing the coaching leadership, the transformational leadership. And we don't talk about this. We just teach transformational leadership as if it's a real thing, without taking into account the fact that 85% of the country cannot do it. You know? So when you step into a boardroom and the guy or lady says, I'm a transformational leader, well, let's find out. Let's find out if your thinking is sufficiently high that actually you do what you say. So when you see on LinkedIn things like servant leader, you know, empathy, listening, it's just nonsense. If you're an empathic leader and you're thinking about emotions all the time, you automatically limit yourself to Keegan's stage 3, which is socialized mind, which means there's 2 more levels above you. So in other words, in order to be a high level thinker, you need to move through emotion into cognition. Now, the point about my framework is, and my system is, that you definitely need balance across cognition and emotion. But more importantly, you need to be capable of choosing. Can I choose to be emotive in a moment? Because if I can't, it's a habit, it's automatic, and I'm not in control. Can I choose to take the abstract position, the global position? Can I choose to do that? So when you find somebody who is genuinely capable of choosing how they are in the moment, they're the ones who can do transformational leadership. They're the ones who can lead the team. You know what I mean?
I'm kind of fascinated and slightly nervous at the same time, Darren, and thinking about all the individuals that I've worked with and teams that I've worked with, and maybe the listeners will think similarly as well. And I appreciate we're just scratching the surface. And the one thing that you've done in addition to this, which perhaps takes it further, is that in your spare time, and we didn't mention this particularly in the introduction, you are creating a book series as well about thinking. And you've named it, I think your first one is Thinking Deliberately, or if I'm not mistaken, but you have a series of these. How does that build on your constructive development theory? And what are the plans for this series of books to help people further?
That's a great question. I've called it Thinking Deliberately because we don't, right? We think we do, but we really don't. Please, if you're listening to this or watching this, just think about how many times during today you've done things automatically. Have you ever stopped, stepped back and gone, you know what, I'm going to run this through my own system first. Is it any good for me? We don't really do that. So I've called it Thinking Deliberately because it's going to introduce constructive development theory. It's going to give you some practical examples of how to stop and step back, right? But the other books, Leading Deliberately, Coaching Deliberately, right? They're the next 2 for 2025. And the reason I put Leading Deliberately in is to just basically to dispel all the myths about leadership. Because I teach at university, I have a bit of an insight into what the ideas are. And I know I can deconstruct them. And I look at people like Elliot Jacques, you know, with his span of discretion, which is great idea. And I look at all the complexity angles and I look at all the theories out there. Because when you talk to businesses, they're not necessarily thinking about, you know, if we've got an apprentice and we teach the apprentice leadership theories, they don't actually care what Dave Ulrich said about HR in 2008. What they want from their apprentices, for example, is more capable thinkers who can think outside the box. So what I've done is on the final year of an apprenticeship program, I've got some workshops that stretch their thinking, that really go into how cognitively complex they are and can they do this stuff in the moment in workshops, because that's more useful. Now, by the time these youngsters, because they're not very old, well, by the time they get to their 30s, what's actually happened is we've grown their thinking. They might never remember what Ulrich said about HR, but what they won't be able to get away from is the fact that we've stretched their thinking upwards and they're going to be more complex thinkers. Okay. The coaching one definitely introduces next level coaching and dismisses the myths about relationships, emotions, and all this kind of stuff from a rapport building, within a coaching relationship. Because when you know that the person that's coming to you, it's not a problem of agency and utility, it's actually a problem of construction that they're coming to you with. The problem that they have Captain Jack Sparrow said, it's not the problem, it's your thinking about the problem that's the problem. And it's that idea. So they are going to be controversial. So whether it's the leading deliberately or coaching deliberately, it's going to be controversial, because we want to dispel the existing myths, because there's so much working in the industry. And I'm guessing you know this from working in where you have been for the last 25 years. We just take things for granted, don't we?
I think that's the challenge, Darren. I think that's the challenge. We all get caught up in the pressures of the day, and I try to have a whole range of guests on this podcast to understand how we can do things differently. So I've had people from the military, I've had academics, I've got some people who work in, let's just call it ordinary industry, but with amazing amazing personal lives in terms of the way that they approach activities and determination and perseverance and ultra endurance. And I think it's been fascinating to hear what you've had to say today, Darren. I'm just trying to think about all the situations, and I absolutely agree that the way that we need to think about things, because we're all facing such a fast-moving global world at the moment, the way that we think will shape the way that we deal with the issues. So, Darren, it's been absolutely fascinating from my side to hear what you've said today. How can we get in contact with you? How do we find your books? How do we learn more about constructive development theory?
Well, the website is there, the adultdevelopment.institute. The books, the first book, Thinking Deliberately, is nearly finished. I've got an editor looking at it right now. So I'm hoping that'll be done by Christmas. And then the other two books, in my own way, I always have stuff started. I will be finishing those next year. And I think the first one will be done within 6 months. So the lead, I'm thinking, now you've said it, I think Coaching Deliberately should be my next one. That's what I'm thinking. Because I want to flip everything around and get us thinking differently about all of this.
What a great note to finish on, Darren. Thank you so much again for all of your time in the preparation for this, I know, and sharing your constructive development theory, the Institute for Adult Development, all your techniques. I think it's been really amazing to hear how you prompt us to think somewhat differently. So thank you so much for that. And thank you so much for appearing on my Clarendon Chronicles podcast, Darren.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you again, Darren. And next episode coming up in a few days and weeks' time. Join me again for the next Clarendon Chronicles podcast for another amazing and stimulating discussion. Thank you and bye for now.